The city should have died 100 times. And yet, it refused. Its bones were marble, its blood was fire, its soul unbroken. For more than 1,000 years, the storms of history broke upon its walls and were scattered into mist. Armies came like tides, kings rose and fell like waves. But this city, this impossible glittering wound on the edge of two worlds, remained. It was called Constantinople. But to its people, it was something more. The queen of cities, the eye of the world, the new Rome. The place where heaven brushed against earth and where the dreams of empires came to live or die. It stood at the meeting point of two continents, where Europe reached out trembling fingers toward Asia, and Asia answered with smoke and gold. It was a gate between worlds, and for 1,000 years, the world beat against that gate and failed. Its walls were said to be unbreakable, 3 layers of stone and faith stretching for miles across the land, carved with the precision of an empire that believed eternity could be built by human hands. The Theodosian walls, some called them the ribs of a sleeping god. To assault them was to strike at the bones of the divine itself. And above those walls, the city gleamed like a vision. Minarets and domes, long before the word Byzantine became a synonym for decadence, rose like frozen prayers into the morning haze. The marble streets shimmered beneath the sun. The golden horn wrapped around it like an embrace of molten light. When invaders came by sea, they met not water, but flame, Greek fire. The most terrifying weapon of the medieval world, an infernal liquid that burned even upon the waves. It hissed, it screamed, it clung to ships and men like a living thing. Sailors said the fire had a mind, that it sought out flesh, that it was not invented, but summoned. Those who saw it said it was as if the city itself breathed fire. Constantinople, the dragon of the Bosphorus. But the true strength of this city was not the fire it wielded or the stone that shielded it. It was the faith that built both. When the Emperor Constantine I raised its first walls in the 4th century, he didn't imagine a mere capital. He imagined a resurrection. Rome had fallen into chaos, but here, on the glittering shores of the Bosphorus, it could be reborn. And it was. From the ashes of empire, a new Rome rose. Greek in language, Christian in soul, imperial in ambition. Constantinople became the living memory of the ancient world, a sanctuary for knowledge, art, and ritual, while the rest of Europe drowned in the darkness of the early Middle Ages. Here, the dream of order did not die. It evolved. The city thrived as a living cathedral, its streets woven with incense smoke and trade dust, its skyline a prayer in marble. The domes of Hagia Sophia caught the sunlight like a halo. Inside, the air shimmered with gold and shadow, 1,000 mosaics glinting like frozen stars. Travelers wrote that entering its gates felt like entering heaven itself. But behind its splendor lay the deeper mystery, the idea that this place was chosen, not by chance, not by men, by destiny. For the Byzantines, Constantinople was not just a city. It was the covenant between God and man, the proof that the world still had order, that Rome's promise had not turned to dust. It became the heart of a civilization, both ancient and startlingly new. Roman law still pulsed through its veins, but Greek thought guided its mind, and Christian devotion sustained its spirit. It was a fusion no other culture had achieved. Empire as faith, faith as empire. And for centuries, it worked. Beyond its gates, the world fractured. Tribes warred, kingdoms burned, new faiths rose from deserts. But within those walls, there was rhythm, ritual, balance. Every dawn began with bells and prayers. Every dusk ended in light cast upon the domes. Scholars debated philosophy, while generals plotted campaigns. Merchants sold silk from China beside spices from Arabia. The city was an orchestra of tongues, a mirror of the known world. Its people believed they lived in the center of creation, and perhaps they were right. For more than a millennium, the fate of continents revolved around this single city. Its emperors crowned kings and broke nations. Its gold built cathedrals in Europe and bought peace in Asia. And when the rest of the world called it old, it called itself eternal. What was it that allowed this city to survive what no other could? Was it the cunning of its rulers, the brilliance of its engineers, the divine favor of its faith? Or was it something older, something buried deep in the human heart? The refusal to fade, the defiance of death itself. Because Constantinople was more than stone and empire, it was a declaration. That civilization could endure even when surrounded by chaos. That beauty could outlast brutality. That a single city could hold the line against time. It was here that the ancient world made its last stand against the new. It was here that Rome's heartbeat continued long after its body was buried. And it was here, above the waters of the Bosphorus, that humanity's greatest illusion, the dream of permanence, was kept alive, burning bright as Greek fire against the darkness. Welcome, traveler, to Empire's Historical. You stand now before the gates of Constantinople, the city that would not die. And as we walk its walls and peer into the golden age of Byzantium, remember this: history is not written in ink, but in fire. If you wish to follow this journey through the rise and fall of the world's forgotten empires, through the glory and ruin that shaped our civilization, then subscribe to Empire's Historical. Every subscription is a torch we carry into the shadows, a promise that these stories will not be forgotten. Now listen, the bells are tolling. The sea is whispering. And somewhere beyond the dawn, the dragon of Constantinople stirs once more. The sea mist clings to the stones, and the sound of waves becomes a heartbeat. You can almost feel the city breathing. Every gust of wind carries the memory of empires. Rome, Greece, Persia, all swallowed, all remembered. Constantinople absorbed the world and made it its own. To understand its power, you must imagine what it meant to those who first beheld it. Travelers from the frozen lands of the north would arrive at dawn, their ships drifting through fog, and there before them rose a vision no mortal mind could have conceived. The sun struck the domes and towers, and the entire city erupted into gold. The columns of the hippodrome glowed. The spires shimmered like the blades of angels, a city of light floating upon the sea. And yet, beneath that brilliance lay an unspoken truth. Constantinople's beauty was not born of peace, but of endurance. It was a city built upon the edge of apocalypse. Its people lived knowing that they stood between worlds, the last guardians of the old and the first witnesses of the new. The Byzantines saw themselves as heirs to Rome, but also as defenders of heaven's earthly reflection. Each generation believed it was their sacred duty to preserve the flame of order in a world descending into chaos. To walk its streets was to walk through centuries layered one upon another. Beneath the marble pavements, Roman bricks still bore the marks of legionaries long dead. Beneath the churches, temples to forgotten gods slept in silence. Constantinople was history made visible, a palimpsest of belief and empire. Its power lay not merely in stone or strategy, but in its idea that a city could outlast the world, that civilization itself could be built high enough, bright enough to defy the inevitable night. This was its faith, and faith can be more dangerous than armies. But eternity is heavy. To carry it is to invite envy. Across the centuries, enemies gathered like storm clouds. From the east came the Persians, the Arabs, the Turks. From the west came jealous crusaders. They all wanted what Constantinople had, the illusion of immortality. They wanted to possess the city that claimed to be the last light of Rome, and each time they broke upon its walls like waves upon stone. How many kings died dreaming of those walls? How many ships sank beneath the burning breath of Greek fire? To assault Constantinople was to wage war not against an army, but against time itself. Inside the city, life continued with the quiet arrogance of the eternal. The markets overflowed with silk and silver, with manuscripts copied by candlelight and icons painted with powdered gold. Monks sang in the echoing corridors of Hagia Sophia, while bureaucrats plotted beneath mosaics of saints. The empire functioned like a living machine, turning the chaos of the world into ceremony. Every act, from the crowning of an emperor to the baking of bread, followed an ancient rhythm. Nothing was random. Everything had meaning. And yet, there was always a shadow. For every bell that rang, there was the memory of the last siege. For every sunrise, the whisper that someday even these stones would fall. The Byzantines carried both pride and dread in their hearts, because to believe in eternity is to live in fear of its end. Still, they endured. Even when famine stalked the land, even when earthquakes tore the domes, even when plague darkened the streets, the city refused to yield. The secret of its endurance lay not only in the genius of its engineers or the devotion of its people, but in something deeper, a collective defiance. To be Byzantine was to believe that nothing truly ends, that every fall is a prelude to resurrection. And perhaps that was why Constantinople became the most enduring myth of all. To the medieval world, it was less a city than a concept, the heart of civilization itself. For the men of the West, crude and feudal, it was a mirror of what they had lost. For the East, it was the gate to heaven, shining beyond the horizon. But here lies the tragedy. Even as the city stood unbroken, the world changed around it. The forces of time, like invisible siege engines, pressed closer. Faith began to fracture. Gold grew scarce. The towers leaned. And the dragon that had once breathed fire began, slowly, to fade into legend. Still, on the eve of its final century, Constantinople shone with a kind of desperate brilliance. Its mosaics gleamed as if to challenge the darkness. Its bells rang louder, as if to remind the world that Rome was not yet dust. The city had become what it had always claimed to be, a symbol, not of power, but of persistence. Imagine standing upon the walls at dusk, the sun setting over the Sea of Marmara, the domes of Hagia Sophia burning like embers against the sky. The city hums with life, priests chanting, merchants shouting, the scent of salt and smoke. Below you, the sea whispers of ages gone. Above you, the wind carries the ghosts of emperors. And in that moment, you understand. This city is not alive in spite of time, it is alive because of it. For the Byzantines, death was never an ending, only another form of endurance. They believed that as long as the Hagia Sophia stood, as long as a single bell tolled within its walls, the empire could never truly die. And in a sense, they were right. For though the city would one day fall, its spirit would move through the centuries, shaping the world in ways even its conquerors could not foresee. Constantinople was not the first city to dream of eternity, but it may have been the last to make that dream feel real. And so, we begin here, at the threshold of myth and history, at the gates of the city that defied time itself. This is not merely the story of an empire, but of the human heart's refusal to surrender. The story of a flame that burned on water and a people who built their heaven on earth. This is Constantinople, This is Byzantium. This is the beginning of forever. If you've felt the echo of this city in your pulse, if you've seen its shadow in the ruins of the world, then join us. Subscribe to Empires Historical. Every empire leaves a heartbeat. Every story deserves to be heard. Let us keep the fire alive together, because somewhere beneath the waves of the Bosphorus, beneath layers of stone and silence, the heart of the Queen of Cities still beats. Slow, patient, waiting for the world to remember her name. The morning light of Constantinople was unlike any other in the world. It did not simply rise, it unveiled. It crept along the marble facades of palaces, glided across the golden tiles of domes, and shimmered on the narrow streets like a living spirit. To awaken in this city was to witness a ritual. The clang of church bells mixed with the cries of merchants, the rustle of silk, the smell of bread and sea salt. Here, life was not chaos, it was ceremony. Every sound, every movement carried the rhythm of a civilization that believed order itself was divine. The Byzantines did not merely live within their city, they performed it. Constantinople was a living liturgy, an empire dressed in incense and song. From the fishermen on the Bosphorus to the scholars in the courtyards of Hagia Sophia, every soul played a part in the grand illusion that the world, for all its decay, still held meaning. To walk through its markets was to see the world condensed. In the stalls of the Macy, the great avenue running through the heart of the city, silk from China mingled with honey from Crete, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, and steel from the mountains of Armenia. Spices perfumed the air with the scent of faraway kingdoms: cinnamon, myrrh, pepper, saffron. A Byzantine merchant could tell you the price of a gem in India or a fur in Kiev, but he would also quote scripture as easily as trade. Commerce and faith, prophet and prayer were not contradictions here. They were twins. And above it all rose the hum of languages. Greek, Latin, Armenian, Arabic, Venetian, Slavic, Hebrew, all intertwined like threads in a single tapestry. Constantinople was the center of the known world, and everyone who entered it became a note in its chorus. Travelers wrote that even its silence spoke in tongues. The city itself was divided not by class, but by rhythm. The wealthy lived in courtyards cooled by fountains, their walls painted with vines, their baths scented with rose oil. Beneath them, in the crowded insulae, those towering tenements of brick and timber, the poor huddled in candlelight. They burned cheap oil, ate dried fish and onions, and slept listening to the distant echo of choirs in the great churches. It was a city of gold and smoke, of sanctity and hunger. But that was the miracle of Constantinople. It held all contradictions and still remained whole. It could be both the palace and the gutter, the cathedral and the alley. Its perfection lay not in purity, but in balance. As the emperor ruled from the great palace, dispensing law and mercy from marble halls that looked out over the sea, beggars prayed in the same language to the same God who anointed him. Heaven and earth touched in this city, not as myth, but as architecture. At the heart of it all stood Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Its dome did not rest upon the ground so much as it floated between heaven and earth. When sunlight streamed through its 40 windows, the entire space seemed to dissolve into light. "It is not built by human hands," said one astonished visitor, "but by angels who forgot the sky." Within that vast, echoing chamber, time felt suspended. The chants of the clergy rose and fell like tides. Mosaics of Christ, Mary, and the saints gleamed from the walls as if they breathed. And for the Byzantines, this was not art. It was revelation. Every festival, every coronation, every procession was an echo of heaven. The emperor, clad in purple, was not a man, but a symbol, a living icon of divine order. When he walked through the city, streets filled with incense and song. Mechanical lions roared from the steps of the throne. Golden birds sang from hidden pipes. And the people bowed not merely to a ruler, but to the idea that God still ruled through man. It is easy, from a modern distance, to see this as vanity. But to the Byzantines, it was survival. Their rituals were armor, their ceremonies, the walls within walls. In a world of uncertainty, beauty became their last defense. Where others built armies, they built meaning. And that meaning was visible even in the smallest details. The mosaics that lined their homes were not mere decoration, but theology in stone, geometries meant to capture the divine. The bread baked in their ovens was marked with the cross. Even the way light fell upon water was seen as a sign. The Byzantines lived surrounded by symbols because symbols gave shape to existence. But this was not a city without shadow. Behind the domes and relics, there were places the sun seldom reached, the back alleys where the city's poor huddled beneath collapsing balconies. There, amid the stink of tanneries and the cries of children, you could feel the other face of Byzantium, exhaustion, a fatigue born not from war or famine, but from too much perfection. The empire had built itself so tightly around ritual that it sometimes forgot the people within. Foreign travelers spoke of narrow streets where disease spread like rumor, of crowded tenements where families lived stacked upon each other, of rent so high that even artisans starved beneath the marble shadow of Hagia Sophia. To them, Constantinople was a city of extremes, of sanctity and corruption, of gold roofs and rotten cellars, and yet even these shadows had their purpose. They reminded the Byzantines that heaven must always stand above hell. The city's contrast was its strength, its contradictions were its truth. For what is faith without doubt? What is light without darkness to define it? Every evening, as the sun fell behind the towers of the city, the marble glowed blood red. The bells rang out across the water, and for a moment, everything was still. Fishermen pulled their nets ashore. Monks whispered vespers. The emperor himself, far within his palace, paused between decrees. And as night settled upon the city, Constantinople did what it had done for centuries. It endured. To endure was its creed. To persist, its art. Every dawn reborn, every dusk forgiven. It was not immortality the Byzantines sought, but continuity. A life stretched thin but unbroken across time. They knew, even then, that perfection could not last, but they also knew that beauty could, and that was enough. At night, the city became something else entirely. The fires of the forges dimmed, the chants of the monasteries faded into the distance, and the sea breathed softly against the stone piers. From the heights of the great palace to the slums near the Golden Horn, Constantinople shimmered beneath 1,000 lamps, each one a fragile imitation of the stars. And yet, it was in that fragile light that the empire's true character emerged, not in glory, but in reflection. The Byzantines believed that to see their city by moonlight was to glimpse eternity. The marble streets glowed like veins of bone, and the domes floated like planets in a private cosmos. The scent of smoke and salt lingered in the air. The whisper of waves echoed through the cisterns beneath the city. It was a living organism, breathing, dreaming, remembering. By the 10th century, Constantinople was the largest city in the known world. 500,000 souls called it home. Traders and thieves, priests and soldiers, poets and sailors. It was not merely the capital of an empire. It was the center of gravity around which the world revolved. When Europe slept, Byzantium dreamed for it. When the East stirred, Byzantium interpreted its awakening. In those centuries, visitors from every corner of the earth came to marvel and to learn. Pilgrims from Russia spoke of its churches as forests of light. Merchants from Italy called it a sea of gold. Even its enemies, after laying siege to its walls, spoke with awe of its defiance. One Arab chronicler wrote, "The city is like a mirror of the heavens, and her towers are the ribs of the world." But perhaps the most remarkable thing was that this empire, so proud, so ancient, did not rest upon the rigid hierarchies of feudal Europe. In Byzantium, there were no born nobles, no fixed class ordained by blood. Power was fluid, like the waters that surrounded it. A peasant could rise to become emperor, as Basileus Thon did, a man born with nothing, who rode to the capital seeking work and ended his life upon the throne. It was a civilization that measured worth not by lineage, but by cunning, faith, and endurance. And yet, the throne was a perilous gift. To rule Constantinople was to stand upon the edge of a sword. The emperor was both divine and mortal, adored and feared. His purple robes were woven with gold and anxiety. Around him, courtiers whispered, bishops schemed, and generals dreamed of rebellion. Power in Byzantium was never secure. It was balanced between loyalty and treachery, between the hand that blessed and the hand that struck. To survive, emperors learned to play a game older than Rome itself. They mastered the art of balance, dividing their generals so that none grew too strong, sending brothers and rivals to govern distant provinces, trusting eunuchs and scholars with power precisely because they could not seize it for themselves. The empire was a chessboard, and its ruler the only piece that could never move freely. But for all their intrigues, Byzantine emperors were not merely rulers, they were visionaries. They saw empire not as dominion, but as performance. Every procession, every coronation was a masterpiece of choreography and illusion. Foreign ambassadors would enter the throne room to find silver lions roaring and mechanical birds singing in golden cages. Curtains of silk would fall from the ceiling, revealing the emperor himself seated upon a throne that rose, as if by divine will, toward the glittering dome. Those spectacles were not vanity, they were language. Through them, the empire declared to the world that Rome still lived, that heaven still watched over earth. The Byzantines understood that power without theater is only violence. To rule the imagination was to rule the age, and their imagination was immense. Their armies, professional and disciplined, numbered in the hundreds of thousands, stationed across Anatolia and the Balkans. Their engineers built fortresses that seemed to grow from the mountains themselves, and their ships, sleek, deadly, carried the secret of Greek fire, a weapon that burned even upon the sea. But their greatest fortress was still the city itself. Beneath the streets of Constantinople ran an entire world invisible to the eye, vast cisterns carved into the earth, storing millions of gallons of water, enough to outlast any siege. The Basilica Cistern, with its forest of marble columns and dark waters, was a cathedral of silence, a reminder that endurance begins below the surface. And when the enemy came by sea, a massive chain, links thick as a man's arm, was drawn across the mouth of the Golden Horn, sealing the harbor like a divine decree. No matter how fierce the assault, the city stood. Its walls repelled Persians, Arabs, Rus, and Bulgars alike. Siege after siege broke upon its stones, leaving only bones and stories behind. The people of Constantinople took this as proof not of luck, but of destiny. They believed they were the chosen guardians of the world's last light. But destiny is a double-edged word. The moment one believes it unshakable, it begins to crumble. The 11th century brought a new shadow from the east, a a people of riders and conquerors who would change the course of history, the Turks. From the plains beyond the Aral Sea they came, swift as falcons, devout and unrelenting. Their empire stretched from Persia to Syria, swallowing cities older than Rome. And in 1071, upon the plain of Manzikert, their path crossed Byzantium's. The Emperor Romanos IV led his army to meet them. 40,000 men beneath the burning Anatolian sun. They were veterans and mercenaries, Greeks and Armenians, even Turks fighting for gold. But gold cannot buy faith, and Rome's discipline had long since begun to rust. When the armies clashed, the empire's confidence shattered. Allies deserted, mercenaries defected, and the emperor himself was captured. The first Roman ruler in 9 centuries to be taken alive. That single battle did what centuries of siege could not. It broke Byzantium's illusion of invincibility. Manzikert was not merely a defeat, it was a revelation. The empire was mortal, after all. When Romanos returned home, blinded and humiliated, he found not pity, but betrayal. The court turned upon him, and within a generation, civil war consumed what remained of the empire's strength. Provinces rebelled, armies fought one another. The great machine of Byzantium, so perfectly balanced for so long, began to tear itself apart from within. It is said that when empires die, they do not fall with a crash. They wither. And in that slow decay lies a terrible beauty. For as Constantinople's grip on the world loosened, its art grew more luminous, its theology deeper, its sense of destiny more desperate. The Byzantines, staring into the mirror of their own decline, found poetry in the reflection. They still called their city eternal, even as eternity slipped through their fingers. The centuries after Manzikert were not years. They were wounds that refused to close. The empire bled slowly, not from the blade of a single conqueror, but from within its own veins. Civil wars followed civil wars. Cousins poisoned cousins, generals crowned themselves kings. Yet even in its despair, Byzantium still carried itself like a god in exile, ruined, yes, but never humbled. From the glittering palaces of Constantinople, emperors still ruled by divine right, even when their armies numbered in the hundreds instead of thousands. The bureaucracy still whispered in marble corridors, writing decrees in purple ink. The churches still thundered with hymns that claimed the empire would never die. Perhaps that was the genius or the curse of Byzantium. Even as its body decayed, its mind refused to believe it was mortal. The emperors who emerged from this chaos understood one truth above all others. The empire could no longer conquer the world by the sword. It must conquer it by imagination. Byzantium began to master a new kind of warfare, not with armies, but with symbols. It was during this fragile rebirth that the Comnenian dynasty rose. Alexios I, a man of iron intellect and careful calculation, understood that the empire's survival depended not on land, but on influence. He knew that power could be projected not only through spears and ships, but through alliances, marriages, and awe. Under him, Byzantium became a master illusionist, a magician cloaked in silk and ceremony. To foreign princes, Alexios offered the hands of Byzantine princesses, educated, elegant, bearing dowries of unimaginable splendor. To ambassadors, he offered an audience in a palace that seemed to belong to another world. The court of Constantinople was a theater where every detail, every curtain of silk, every echoing chant, every mechanical bird was part of a grand performance. When envoys from Cilicia entered the reception hall of the Blachernae Palace, they found themselves surrounded by silver lions that roared, peacocks that sang, and fountains that rained rosewater upon mosaics of gold. The emperor's throne, modeled after the biblical seat of Solomon, rose slowly into the air, shimmering in torchlight. The ambassadors fell to their knees. This was not politics, this was revelation. Byzantium had discovered the alchemy of spectacle, turning ritual into power. While barbarian kings ruled through fear, Byzantine emperors ruled through wonder. And in that wonder lay control. But beneath the pageantry, there was method. Alexios knew that the empire's strength rested on two pillars: bureaucracy and the army. The civil service, a living descendant of Roman administration, continued to collect taxes directly from the provinces, feeding the heart of the capital. Meanwhile, the army, restructured into themata and tagmata, was both sword and shield, protecting the borders while guarding the throne from its own ambitions. No general was ever allowed to command troops from his homeland. No officer could rise without the emperor's favor. Even the most competent were watched, and many were promoted to distant posts where their loyalty could not threaten the crown. And when trust was impossible, emperors turned to the unthreatening, the eunuchs, the monks, the scholars. These men, stripped of worldly ambition, became the empire's most dangerous weapons precisely because they had nothing left to desire. The system worked until it didn't. For beneath the glitter of control, Byzantium was rotting. Wealth flowed to the capital while the provinces withered. Farmers abandoned their land. Merchants fled the heavy taxes. The empire was becoming a mirror, bright on the surface, hollow beneath. Yet its people clung to the illusion, for to be Byzantine was to believe that order itself was sacred. And still, the world outside shifted. The Latins, the Western heirs of Rome, had grown restless. In their cathedrals of stone, they prayed in Latin to the same God, but they spoke a different language of power. They called the Byzantines proud, decadent, corrupt. The Byzantines called them crude, barbaric, and dangerously naive. The two halves of Christendom looked at each other and saw strangers. It began with whispers over scripture. The Greeks and Latins argued over words, filioque and from the sun. But the argument was not about theology. It was about who ruled heaven. Was it the Pope of Rome or the Patriarch of Constantinople? In 1054, those whispers became thunder. The East-West schism tore the Christian world in two. Excommunications were hurled like weapons. Churches were shuttered. Priests cursed each other from the pulpits. The faith that had once united the empire with the West now became the blade that divided them. And yet, the Byzantines still looked upon the Latins with a mix of pity and superiority. To them, the feudal lords of Western Europe were little more than armed peasants, men who owned land but not civilization. Byzantium, in contrast, remained a world governed by intellect and law, not birth and blood. A peasant could rise to power. A noble could fall into ruin. In a sense, it was the first meritocracy in history, a bureaucracy that rewarded ability over ancestry. This flexibility gave Byzantium a strange kind of resilience. Even as dynasties fell, the empire adapted. It absorbed conquerors, educated their sons, married their daughters, baptized their kings. It transformed enemies into vassals, vassals into allies, and allies into instruments of empire. It was a web spun from gold and faith, delicate yet unbreakable. But the web depended on balance, and balance is the most fragile illusion of all. To maintain harmony, the emperor walked a narrow path. He must appear strong enough to command fear, but merciful enough to inspire love. Too much of one, and rebellion followed. Too much of the other, and decay set in. Each ruler became an acrobat on the edge of history. His every gesture weighed against the judgment of God and men. The Byzantines knew their empire was precarious, but they believed it was eternal. They had outlasted Rome. They had outlived Persia. They believed they could outlive anything, but eternity has its price, and its name is complacency. While the empire perfected the art of appearing eternal, the world around it learned the art of change. From the plains of France to the deserts of Arabia, kingdoms rose on the back of new faiths, new weapons, new ways of thinking. Byzantium, trapped in its golden circle, mistook endurance for strength. And so, when the next storm gathered beyond its borders, the empire did not prepare, it prayed. The storm began not with thunder, but with letters. Across the mountains of Anatolia and the plains of Europe, parchment carried a plea, a cry from the Queen of Cities herself. The Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, besieged on every frontier, wrote to the West for help. His empire, he said, was the last shield between Christendom and the rising tide of the Turks. His words were heavy with lamentation, wrapped in humility, but edged with desperation. He asked for soldiers, just a few regiments, seasoned knights to bolster the weary Byzantine ranks. He did not yet know what his request would unleash. In the year 1095, in a small French town called Clermont, a pope rose to answer that call. Urban II stood before a crowd of lords, knights, and peasants, and his voice became flame. Deus vult, he cried, God wills it. He called upon the men of Christendom to take up the cross, to march east, and to reclaim the Holy Land. But beneath the holy words lay something far older, a hunger for glory, for salvation, for power. What began as a call to rescue Byzantium became a storm that would nearly destroy it. From the fields and forests of Europe they came, an ocean of humanity surging eastward. Knights in shining mail, barefoot peasants with wooden crosses, priests bearing relics, bandits seeking plunder. Chroniclers called it an armed pilgrimage, but it was more like a tide of chaos wrapped in faith. The Byzantines, watching from their walls, saw the dust rising over the horizon and wondered if they had summoned salvation or doom. When the first waves of crusaders reached Constantinople, they came not as allies, but as locusts. They looted villages, burned farms, and attacked Byzantine citizens in their hunger. One leader, a monk named Peter the Hermit, led a mob so unruly that Alexios was forced to send troops to stop them from burning the suburbs of his own capital. The emperor's heart must have sunk as he watched the crosses gleaming above that endless, unruly horde. He had called for an army and received a flood. Still, Alexios was a man of calculation. Against his better instincts, he opened the gates. The Crusaders were ferried across the Bosphorus under Byzantine supervision, their passage paid for with gold and promises. To many in the West, Constantinople seemed like another world, its streets of marble, its domes of gold, its wealth beyond imagination. They whispered that the Queen of Cities was too rich, too soft, too proud, and yet the alliance worked, at least for a time. Together, the Crusaders and Byzantines struck at the Seljuk Turks, retaking cities and fortresses long lost to the empire. In 1099, Jerusalem itself fell to the Latin knights in a storm of blood and prayer. For a fleeting generation, Byzantium stood again in sunlight. Trade revived, armies marched, the empire breathed once more, but the cure carried the poison. For 200 years, waves of crusaders came and went across Byzantine lands, armies of the West marching through the East, each claiming the cross and leaving ruin behind. With every campaign, the mistrust between Greek and Latin deepened. To the Byzantines, these men were not saviors, but barbarians wearing the mask of Christ. To the Crusaders, Byzantium was a faithless empire, too rich to be holy, too clever to be pure. The spark became hatred, and hatred became destiny. In the year 1204, the Fourth Crusade gathered, not to fight the infidel, but to settle debts. Unable to pay the Venetians for ships, the Crusaders turned their swords upon their fellow Christians. They burned the city of Zara, ignoring the Pope's condemnation. Then came a new temptation. A Byzantine prince in exile, Alexios Angelos, promised them riches if they would restore him to his father's throne. And so, the Crusaders turned their eyes toward Constantinople. When they first saw the city, they were struck silent. Its walls stretched to the horizon, its towers glittered like a mirage. "No man who has not seen this city," wrote one knight, "could imagine that such a place existed upon earth." Yet, awe quickly gave way to greed. The Crusaders demanded their gold, their debts, their rewards. When none came, they drew their swords. On an April morning in 1204, they attacked. They came from the sea, ships bristling with ladders and catwalks, archers raining death upon the walls. The defenders fought with desperate courage, but the chain across the Golden Horn was broken, and the invaders poured into the harbor. The Queen of Cities fell not to the east, but to the west, to men who spoke her prayers, but not her language. For 3 days, Constantinople burned. Monks were cut down before their altars. Churches were stripped of relics and gold. Statues that had stood since the time of the Caesars were torn from their pedestals, melted into coins. The great bronze horses of the Hippodrome were carried off to Venice, where they still stand today, a trophy of faith turned to theft. Nicetas Choniates, a historian who lived through the sack, wrote of it with the grief of a son burying his mother. "The Queen of Cities," he said, "was laid waste by her own children. Fire consumed her beauty, and black soot covered her crown." The empire did not die that day, but it was broken, its heart plundered, its people scattered. The Crusaders carved the empire into pieces, crowning a Latin emperor in the Hagia Sophia. They called their new dominion the Empire of Romania, but to the Byzantines, it was Franco-Cratia, the rule of the Franks. For 60 years, Constantinople lay in foreign hands, its churches turned into stables, its libraries left to rot. And yet, like the phoenix emblazoned upon its imperial seals, Byzantium refused to vanish. In exile, new courts rose in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond. Byzantine nobles, stripped of their wealth, clung to their identity like a relic. They spoke the old language, kept the old faith, and whispered the old dream that one day they would return. And they did. In 1261, the armies of Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople. When he entered the city, he wept. For victory, yes, but also for what he saw. The Queen of Cities was a ruin. Grass grew in the streets where emperors once paraded. The Hagia Sophia stood silent, her mosaics blackened by smoke. The people were few, the glory gone. "The crown is returned," he said, "but it sits upon the skull of a corpse." From then on, Byzantium lived as a ghost, majestic, fading, proud. Its emperors ruled a city of memories, its palaces haunted by echoes. But even as its power crumbled, its spirit endured. For in the silence of its broken churches, one could still feel it. The pulse of the old world, faint but unyielding. The empire that once ruled the earth had become an idea, and ideas, unlike empires, do not die easily. There are defeats that end empires, and there are defeats that reveal what an empire truly is. The Battle of Manzikert was not a mere military disaster. It was a mirror held to Byzantium's soul. When the dust settled upon that Anatolian plain, it was not the blood of soldiers that stained the earth, but the illusion of invincibility that had protected the empire for centuries. The Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes had marched east with 40,000 men, Greeks, Armenians, Georgians, and mercenaries drawn from every corner of Christendom. They marched beneath banners embroidered with crosses and eagles, singing hymns to the eternal Rome. Yet their unity was an illusion, stitched together by gold and pride. The empire's armies were no longer the disciplined legions of Justinian's age, but fragments bound by ambition and suspicion. The summer sun hung cruel and indifferent above the field of Manzikert. On one side stood the Byzantians, armored in the memory of 1,000 victories. On the other, the Seljuk Turks, swift riders from the steppes, their horses like shadows, their arrows like whispers of death. The two forces circled one another for hours, the dust rising in a golden haze. Then, as the Byzantine line advanced, confusion spread. Miscommunication turned to panic, panic to betrayal. Some of Romanos's mercenaries, Turks hired to fight Turks, switched sides in the heat of battle. Others fled, and when the imperial standard fell, so too did the will of the army. At dusk, the emperor was taken captive, the first Roman ruler in 9 centuries to be captured alive. They say when he was brought before the Seljuk Sultan, he was so broken and bloodied that the victors could hardly believe he was the emperor of the Romans. But the Sultan, Alp Arslan, did not mock him. He lifted the beaten man from the ground and said, "What would you have done to me had I been your prisoner?" Romanos, his lips cracked and dry, whispered, "Perhaps I would have killed you." The Sultan smiled. "My punishment," he replied, "is far greater. I forgive you." For a week, the two men dined together, the Christian emperor and the Muslim conqueror, sharing bread and words about the weight of rule. When Romanos was released, he was not the same man, nor was the empire he returned to. The ransom was vast: gold, cities, and his own daughter promised in marriage to a Turkish prince. But what he brought back was something no gold could buy, a humiliation that would echo through generations. When he crossed the Bosphorus again, the capital received him not as a survivor, but as a failure. The court, ever hungry for blood, tore him from the throne. His eyes were gouged out in a ritual of political blindness, and he died soon after, consumed by infection. Thus ended the last emperor who dared to believe Byzantium could still command the world by strength alone. In the years that followed, the empire fractured like a mirror dropped upon marble. Civil war followed civil war, provinces broke away, the treasury emptied. Within a decade, the empire's armies had dwindled from 40,000 to barely 4. The great fortresses of Asia Minor, once the empire's shield, fell one by one. The Turks swept across the Anatolian heartland, not as a tide of conquest, but as a slow flood, swallowing fields, cities, and faiths. To the chroniclers of the age, the disaster at Manzikert became a wound too deep to name. They did not call it by name. They called it simply that dreadful day. The historian Anna Komnene, daughter of Emperor Alexios III, wrote of it with reverent horror. The fortunes of Rome, she said, had sunk to their lowest ebb, for the armies of the east were dispersed, and the Turks gained command of the lands between the seas. Another chronicler, Michael Ataliets, wrote more simply, "We were pressed on all sides by the bonds of death. Yet even in this ruin, the empire endured. Byzantium had faced annihilation before, by Persians, by Arabs, by its own corruption, and each time it had found within itself some secret reservoir of survival. Its walls still stood, its faith still burned. But this time, the enemy was not outside the walls, it was inside. The emperors who followed inherited not an empire, but an argument. Who should rule, who should be blamed, and what was left to save. The aristocrats hoarded wealth, the clergy demanded penance, the people prayed for a savior. Across the provinces, governors raised their own banners. The empire's glory, once a living flame, had become embers scattered in the wind. And yet, through the smoke, something flickered. The old Byzantine instinct for survival through adaptation. Even in defeat, they understood that strength alone would not save them. They would have to learn to live in the shadow of others, to trade power for cunning, territory for time. In the West, the news of Byzantium's fall spread like wildfire through the churches of Europe. To the Latin Christians, the loss of the East was not just a political tragedy, but a cosmic one. The guardians of the Holy Land were faltering. The gate between Christendom and Islam was crumbling. The cries of Constantinople reached Rome, and from Rome, they echoed across the continent. It was this echo that would awaken something vast and terrible, the First Crusade. But before salvation came ruin, and before renewal came humiliation. The empire's decline after Manzikert was not the story of an empire dying. It was the story of an empire learning, against its will, how to be mortal. The Byzantines had once believed they were the last reflection of heaven on earth. Now, for the first time in 1,000 years, they began to understand what it meant to live without divine protection. And in that knowledge, something human returned to them. For when eternity cracks, it reveals the face of man. The fall of Manzikert had not only shattered the empire's borders, it had shattered its certainty. The Byzantines had always believed that God's favor lay upon their walls, their rituals, their emperors. But now, the silence of heaven was deafening. The map of their world had been redrawn, and for the first time in centuries, Constantinople was not the heart of a vast dominion, but an island of light adrift in a sea of enemies. In the burned-out provinces of Anatolia, churches became mosques, Greek became a whisper, and the empire's ancient roads filled with dust. The great estates were lost, the grain routes severed, and the wealth that had once flowed from Asia to the capital slowed to a trickle. The empire was alive, but barely. It breathed like a man with a crushed chest. And yet, there is a strange beauty in how a dying civilization continues to dream. Even as their armies collapsed, the Byzantines built libraries. Even as their cities fell, they wrote hymns to victory. They had lost the body of the empire, but its soul still burned with a stubborn light. "If the earth should fall into darkness," wrote one monk, "let Constantinople be the last candle to go out." But candles need air, and the empire's air was running thin. In Constantinople, the court became a stage of intrigue. Generals schemed, patriarchs plotted, and every corridor whispered treason. The dynasty of the Komnenoi rose from this turmoil like a new constellation. Its first emperor, Alexios Sorcerer, was both soldier and scholar, diplomat and deceiver. He understood that to survive, Byzantium could no longer fight alone. It would have to seduce the West. He sent envoys across the sea, letters dripping with sorrow and grandeur, appealing to the princes of Europe to aid their Christian brothers in the East. "The Turks," he wrote, "are at our gates. If the Queen of Cities falls, what hope remains for Christendom?" It was not entirely true, but truth had long since become a luxury. What Alexios received in return was not an army, but a tide. A human flood clothed in rags and iron, bearing crosses on their banners and hunger in their hearts. They came in the name of salvation, but they carried with them another gospel, that of conquest. The First Crusade was born from Byzantium's plea for aid, but it would soon grow beyond the empire's control. For the moment, however, it brought relief. The Crusaders helped reclaim Nicaea, Antioch, and parts of Syria. For a brief, flickering decade, it seemed that the Komnenian dynasty had restored the empire's breath. The trade routes reopened, the treasury filled once more with gold, and Constantinople's markets hummed with life. Foreign princes sent their sons to be educated in the imperial court, and once again, the queen of cities glittered. But Byzantium's revival was a ghost wearing a crown. Beneath the gilded surface, its heart remained frail. The provinces lost to the Turks could not be regained. The empire's armies, once vast, were now mercenary forces loyal only to gold. Even its victories depended on foreign swords and foreign promises. The empire that had once shaped the world was now learning to survive within the world's shadow. Still, Alexios and his descendants understood something profound, that empires do not endure through conquest, but through memory. The Komnenoi built not monuments of triumph, but monuments of continuity. They restored churches, copied manuscripts, and codified laws. They turned their city into a sanctuary of civilization amidst the chaos of medieval war. And for a time, it worked. The empire lived in a delicate balance between east and west, between faith and fear. But balance is a cruel master. The same west that had once marched to Byzantium's aid now coveted its riches. Venice, Genoa, Pisa, the merchant republics of Italy began to carve their fortunes from the empire's trade. Byzantine harbors filled with Western ships, their holds heavy with silk, spices, and arrogance. Gold flowed outward, influence inward. Slowly, Constantinople became less the ruler of commerce than its captive. And beyond the horizon, new powers stirred. The Seljuks had fractured. But in their place, other Turkish dynasties rose, leaner, hungrier, more devout. They watched the empire with the same patience the sea gives the shore. The Byzantines, meanwhile, turned their gaze inward, mistaking survival for safety. Their theologians debated the color of angels while their borders vanished. Their emperors brokered peace with one hand and signed away provinces with the other. What they could not win by force, they tried to preserve through ritual, through beauty, through the illusion that order still existed. Perhaps that was Byzantium's greatest tragedy. It could not imagine a world without itself. And so it clung to the pageantry of power, even as the stage collapsed. The emperors still rode through the Golden Gate in golden armor. The Senate still convened to debate matters long beyond their reach. The choirs of Hagia Sophia still sang hymns to eternal Rome. But eternity had already begun to fade. By the close of the 11th century, the empire was a ghost empire. Its strength measured not in legions, but in memories. The Byzantines had learned to wear defeat with dignity, to weave ruin into ritual, to transform loss into legend. They believed that as long as the liturgy continued, as long as the city's walls held, their world could never truly end. But the truth was more fragile. Manzikert had been only the beginning. Beyond the mountains, new empires were gathering, Latin, Turkic, and Mongol, and each saw in Byzantium not a beacon, but a prize. The city's fate was no longer its own to decide. In the centuries to come, Constantinople would rise again and again, each time smaller, each time wiser, each time closer to the edge. But for now, in the shadow of Manzikert, it learned its most painful lesson, that the greatest danger to a civilization is not the sword at its throat, but the silence that follows it. For empires do not die in battle. They die when they no longer recognize themselves. And yet, even as the world shifted beneath its feet, Byzantium endured, half in faith, half in memory. Its people still believed, still built, still prayed beneath the trembling dome of Hagia Sophia. The sun still rose over the Bosphorus, casting the city in gold. The bells still tolled over the water, calling to a god who seemed ever more distant. And as they knelt in the smoke of their own survival, the Byzantines whispered the same ancient prayer, that the empire might outlast the world once more. There are moments when faith turns inward and devours itself. The Fourth Crusade was one of those moments, a wound so deep that it bled through centuries. Byzantium had survived the fury of Persians, Arabs, and Turks, but what it could not survive was salvation in the wrong hands. At the dawn of the 13th century, the empire stood fragile but unbroken. Its emperors, weary descendants of greatness, ruled from marble halls that echoed with ghosts. The world around them had changed. New kingdoms rose in the west, new faiths burned in the east, but Constantinople still shone, proud and unwilling to believe it had grown old. It was a city of memory, pretending to be eternal. In 1202, a call went out from Rome, a call draped in holiness but shadowed by debt. The Pope had summoned a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem, yet the men who answered were not saints but debtors, knights entangled in the commerce of salvation. The Venetians, the merchant princes of the sea, offered ships for the crusaders to sail, but at a price. When the armies could not pay, the Venetians turned piety into profit. They proposed another target, the Christian city of Zara, rival to Venice. And so it began, not with prayer, but with plunder. The Crusaders sacked Zara, their swords consecrated by greed. Excommunication followed, but so did momentum. Once the wheels of faith begin to turn, even the church cannot stop them. And somewhere in that chaos, a new opportunity arose. A young Byzantine prince in exile, Alexios Angelos, son of a deposed emperor. He promised the Crusaders everything they wanted: gold, ships, soldiers, and reunion with Rome if they would restore him to his father's throne. To the Venetians, it was business. To the Crusaders, destiny. To Byzantium, disaster. In the spring of 1203, their fleet appeared like an iron storm upon the Sea of Marmara. Hundreds of ships gliding toward the city whose very name had come to mean majesty. From the walls, the people of Constantinople watched in disbelief. The banners that fluttered upon those masts bore crosses, not the crescent of Islam, not the emblems of the Turk, but the same cross they themselves venerated. Salvation was at their gates, but it came bearing torches. The Crusaders attacked with a ferocity born of desperation. Fire and faith mingled as ships rammed the sea walls. Arrows darkened the sky, yet the city held as it always had. Constantinople had seen 1,000 sieges and survived them all. Its defenders believed that this too would pass, and in a way, it did. The Crusaders withdrew temporarily after forcing the restoration of the young prince, now crowned Alexios III. For a moment, it seemed the strange alliance might hold. The Crusaders celebrated. The emperor promised gold he did not have. But promises made in desperation are debts paid in blood. When the emperor could not deliver the fortune he had pledged, tempers ignited. The Latins grew restless, hungry, humiliated. The people of Constantinople, already resentful of their Western allies, rioted in the streets. The two worlds, Greek and Latin, East and West, faith and faith, collided not as brothers, but as mirrors that refused to reflect one another. By January 1204, it was inevitable. The Latins demanded payment. The Byzantines demanded their departure. Neither side could retreat without losing the illusion of righteousness. In the dark corners of the Venetian camp, plans took shape. The crusade that had lost its purpose found a new one. If gold could not be given, it would be taken. If the empire could not be redeemed, it would be replaced. When dawn came on April 12th, 1204, the Queen of Cities faced her final betrayal. The Crusaders attacked from the sea, their ships lashed together into floating fortresses. The Venetian galleys struck the sea walls, ladders rising against marble. Arrows fell like rain. The air burned with pitch and prayer. For 3 days, Constantinople, became a vision of hell. The Crusaders broke through, and the city fell, not to her enemies, but to her kin. Churches were stripped of relics and gold. Priests were slaughtered before their altars. The Hagia Sophia, the heart of Byzantium, was desecrated. Its sacred floor flooded with wine as drunken soldiers danced to mock the liturgy. The bronze horses of the hippodrome, trophies of Rome's ancient triumphs, were torn down and shipped to Venice. It was not simply a conquest, it was an autopsy. Nicetas Choniates, a statesman who watched his world collapse, wrote with a grief that still burns like cinders, "Even the barbarians, when they take a city, grant pity, but these men who bear the cross, showed none. They made the house of God a stable for their beasts." For the first time in 1,000 years, the walls of Constantinople did not protect but imprison. Smoke coiled over the Golden Horn, carrying with it the scent of parchment, wax, and burning flesh. Treasures that had survived Rome, Persia, and Islam perished at the hands of Christendom. The Crusaders called it victory. History would call it suicide. When the flames subsided, they crowned their own emperor, a Latin king upon a Greek throne, and divided the corpse of the empire like carrion. Venice took the richest ports, the islands, the trade routes. The Crusader lords carved new dominions from the bones of Byzantium. Thessalonica, Achaia, Athens, all painted with Latin crosses but soaked in Greek tears. For 60 years, the so-called Latin Empire sat like a parasite in the heart of the East. Its rulers spoke French in the halls of Constantine and prayed in Latin beneath the domes of Justinian. The Hagia Sophia's mosaics, once the light of Christendom, were covered in plaster and neglect. What had been the world's greatest city became a ruin haunted by echoes. But ruins remember. Beyond the reach of the Crusaders, fragments of the old empire endured. In Nicaea, Epirus and Trebizond, Greek princes and exiles gathered what remained: libraries, relics, and the stubborn dream of return. They called themselves emperors still, though their crowns were heavy with loss. "We are not conquered," one wrote, "only displaced." For the Byzantines, survival had become an act of defiance. Their cities were small, their armies few, but their memory was vast. They rebuilt schools, trained scholars, copied manuscripts, and preserved the rituals of an empire that no longer existed. They believed that, if they could keep the words alive, the world that spoke them might one day return. And against all odds, it did. In the summer of 1261, nearly 60 years after the sack, the dream awoke again. The exiled Byzantine state at Nicaea, led by Emperor Michael IV Palaiologos, had grown quietly, patiently, like a root beneath the ashes. When the Latin guards of Constantinople marched out on campaign, a small Byzantine force under Alexios Strategopoulos crept through a hidden gate and entered the city under cover of darkness. What they found was not a city, but a corpse. The queen of cities, once the beating heart of the world, lay in ruin. Churches roofless, statues mutilated, libraries drowned in dust. Grass grew where emperors once walked. The Hagia Sophia stood blackened and hollow, its great dome echoing with the cooing of doves. Strategopoulos wept, not for victory, but for the desolation of it. When Michael VIII arrived, he dismounted before the shattered gates and kissed the ground. The Byzantines had returned, but the Byzantium they found no longer existed. The Latin Empire, brittle and corrupt, had burned itself out, but in doing so, it had burned away the splendor of a millennium. What remained was dignity, clinging to dust. Michael entered the Hagia Sophia to be crowned, his voice breaking as he chanted the ancient liturgy that had not been heard there in decades. The people knelt, tears mingling with ash. The bells rang again over the Bosphorus, calling the faithful home. Yet the sound, though glorious, was hollow. The queen had been restored, but her crown was rusted. The city that had once held 1 million souls now held barely 50,000. The palaces were gutted, the treasuries empty. Trade had moved to Genoa and Venice, the same merchants who had once sacked her. The Byzantine fleet was gone, its harbors empty save for scavengers. The empire that had once ruled 3 continents was reduced to a shadow hugging the shores of the Bosphorus. But even a shadow can hold memory. The Byzantines rebuilt their city stone by stone, not out of hope for conquest, but out of reverence for what had been. They repainted the saints, polished the marble, restored the mosaics with trembling hands. In the evenings, the people gathered before the ruins of the Hippodrome to sing hymns older than sorrow. The empire's body was frail, but its voice still carried the echo of eternity. In a way, the return of Constantinople was not a triumph of power, but of faith, the faith that memory itself could be a form of victory. To live after humiliation and still believe in beauty, that was Byzantium's last miracle. Yet the world had changed beyond recognition. To the north, new powers rose: the Serbian kingdom, the Bulgarian Empire, the restless Italian city-states. To the east, the Turks were uniting again under new banners. And far beyond the steppes, the Mongols were coming. A storm so vast that it consumed empires as if they were dust motes in the sun. Byzantium, reborn in weakness, was surrounded by the living embodiments of its past mistakes. The West saw it as ancient and exotic, a ghost wrapped in gold. The East saw it as ripe for the taking, but the Byzantines, as they had always done, endured by wit. They played their enemies against one another, offering treaties one year and betrayals the next. They survived through intelligence, through patience, through sheer refusal to die. Michael VIII tried to mend the unhealable. He sought union with the Latin Church, hoping that shared faith might bring protection from the West. But faith, once broken, becomes sharper than any sword. His people saw the gesture not as diplomacy, but as betrayal. Better the Sultan's turban, they whispered, than the Pope's crown. It was a bitter irony that the empire which had once united Christendom now stood despised by both East and West. Still, the Byzantines clung to their city as a drowning man clings to the last piece of wreckage. They no longer dreamed of empire. They dreamed only of endurance. The mosaics glittered again beneath the candlelight, though fewer candles burned each year. Scholars continued to teach Plato and Ptolemy to classrooms of children who might never see beyond the city walls. In the twilight of the Middle Ages, Constantinople became not a power, but a conscience. The last voice of the ancient world whispering to a modern one it could no longer comprehend. And so the centuries passed. The empire outlived the crusader kingdoms that had destroyed it. It outlived the empires of its conquerors, even as it shrank into irrelevance. There is something profoundly human in that, the refusal to vanish. Even when surrounded by the ruins of its own grandeur, Byzantium never lost its poise. One Italian traveler wrote of visiting the city in the 1300s. "She is like a queen widowed," he said, "still dressed in her jewels, still proud, though her halls are empty." That image would haunt Europe for centuries, a civilization that had outlasted its purpose, too graceful to die, too weary to live. In the smoke of her cathedrals, one could still hear the echo of her defiance. For even stripped of empire, Byzantium continued to shape the world. Her law became the foundation of kingdoms, her theology, the heart of the Orthodox faith, her art, the language of eternity. What began as tragedy became legacy. When the Venetians stole her bronze horses, they could not steal the idea that forged them. When the Crusaders burned her books, they could not burn the thoughts that escaped on the breath of her scholars. Those scholars, fleeing westward after the city's fall, carried with them the manuscripts of Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy, seeds that would blossom into the Renaissance. It is one of history's quietest ironies that the destruction of Constantinople helped ignite the rebirth of the West. Out of her ashes came the spark that would light a new world. The city that had fallen to its brothers became the mother of their awakening. Such is the way of empires. They do not vanish, they transform. By the end of the 13th century, Constantinople had become less a city than a prayer, less a capital than a memory. Her towers still pierced the sky, her bells still sang across the water, but her heart beat faintly, like a whisper carried by wind. And yet, even in that fragility, there was greatness. To live on after death, to breathe after ruin. That was Byzantium's final act of majesty. As the historian Nikitas Choniates once wrote, standing amid the ashes of his city, "They have burned our marble, but not our meaning. They have taken our crown, but not our faith. For what is lost in time may yet endure in eternity." And so the Queen of Cities remained, broken, radiant, immortal in her suffering. The cross still gleamed upon her domes, though beneath it lay the silence of all that was gone. This was the cost of faith turned to fire, of salvation born as conquest. The Fourth Crusade had come to redeem the East, and had instead crucified it. But Byzantium, as always, refused to die completely. Even stripped of its empire, it lingered in every cathedral, every law, every dream of order that came after. For some civilizations are too vast to end. They simply become the world. History at times moves not with thunder, but with silence. The centuries after the restoration of Constantinople in 1261 were such a silence. An age when the once great empire no longer roared, but whispered. The Byzantines had reclaimed their city, but not their destiny. What returned beneath Michael VIII, Palaiologos, was not the empire of emperors, but the shadow of an idea struggling to remember its own name. Constantinople, reborn from Latin ashes, stood scarred and hollow. Her walls were patched with rubble, her domes blackened by fire. The palaces of emperors had become tombs of marble and dust. What gold once gleamed from the mosaics was now dull, flaking, dim as dying stars. The Queen of Cities had survived, yes, but survival is not life. The empire's reach had shrunk to a few broken provinces, bits of Thrace, pockets of the Aegean, the last fragments of Asia Minor clinging like islands in a hostile sea. Where once the Roman eagle shadowed 3 continents, now the double-headed eagle looked inward, one eye fixed on the past, the other on the threat gathering across the straits. The Turks were no longer distant horsemen of the East. They were neighbors, watchful, patient, and inevitable. Yet within the shrunken heart of Byzantium, life still moved with the grace of memory. Scholars debated Aristotle in candlelight. Monks copied scriptures with trembling devotion. Merchants bartered spices and silks in the same markets that had outlived empires. The empire had forgotten how to expand, but not how to endure. Still, endurance cannot protect forever. In 1344, an earthquake shook Gallipoli, a port guarding the narrow path between Europe and Asia. The city's walls cracked, its garrisons fled. To most, it was a disaster. To the Ottomans, it was an invitation. In the ruins, they built their first bridgehead into Europe. It was not conquest that carried them across the Dardanelles. It was the empire's exhaustion. From that moment, the tide began to turn. The Ottomans were unlike the Turks of old. They were not raiders, but architects of empire. Their discipline was quiet, their faith unshakable, their purpose divine. Where the Byzantines built palaces of marble, the Ottomans built time itself, patiently, brick by brick. They did not storm walls, they surrounded them with centuries, and as they rose, Byzantium collapsed inward. The 14th century brought calamity upon calamity. Drought, famine, rebellion, and plague swept through the remaining provinces like fire through dry grass. The Black Death arrived in the 1340s, invisible and unstoppable. It spared neither emperor nor monk, neither priest nor peasant. Chroniclers wrote that the dead outnumbered the living, that the bells of Constantinople tolled without ceasing. Gregorius, the philosopher-historian, mourned not only the loss of life, but the loss of spirit. "We have survived the sword," he wrote, "only to fall to the air we breathe." Entire districts of the city were left to rot. Churches stood empty, their icons gathering dust instead of prayers. The Byzantine world, once an orchestra of faith, order, and splendor, had fallen into a minor key. But even as the body weakened, the mind remained luminous. In those dim years, Byzantine scholars turned their eyes not outward, but inward, toward the mysteries of philosophy, the precision of theology, the structure of the cosmos. They debated not the empire's borders, but the nature of light itself, the divine light that transfigured Christ on Mount Tabor. It was a strange, almost tragic beauty. An empire dying of the body yet still writing hymns about eternity. And around them, the world grew sharper. The West was awakening. In Florence, Venice, and Paris, the seeds of a new age were germinating, an age that would call itself Renaissance. Ironically, it was Byzantine exiles who would carry those seeds westward, fleeing the decay of their homeland with manuscripts under their arms. While the empire sank, its thought would live again in the cities that once envied it. But within Constantinople, time felt like a tightening circle. Each year, the empire's world grew smaller. The Palaiologoi emperors, proud yet impoverished, pawned the crown jewels to Venetian bankers, mortgaged palaces to Genoese merchants, and begged for aid from kings who no longer remembered what the word Byzantium meant. Outside the city's gates, Ottoman banners multiplied. Each emirate that fell to the crescent brought the border closer. The Turks were not in a hurry. They did not need to be. Their empire was young, and time itself fought for them. Inside the walls, Byzantium remained a kingdom of illusions. Its people spoke of the city as the world entire, even as the countryside beyond the walls slipped away. They performed coronations with golden robes borrowed from ancestors, recited decrees in a language few still understood, and prayed that God would remember what they had once been. It was faith as inertia. When Emperor John VI Cantacuzene ascended the throne, he did not inherit an empire, he inherited a paradox. He ruled a city that believed itself eternal, yet lived in daily fear of ending. He saw his people starving beneath the mosaics of angels, his soldiers wearing armor older than their grandfathers. Yet, he also saw something beautiful in their stubbornness, a faith that refused to die, even when everything else had. He wrote in his memoirs, "We live as if death were another form of delay. We do not die, we continue." But even continuation demands compromise. The emperors of the late Byzantine age became masters not of expansion, but of survival by surrender. They traded fortresses for peace, provinces for years. They courted both East and West, offering faith itself as currency. In 1438, Emperor John VIII Palaiologos traveled to Florence to negotiate union with the Latin Church, a desperate attempt to save his city through theology. The Council of Florence was a spectacle of weary diplomacy. Greek bishops and Latin cardinals arguing over the procession of the Holy Spirit, while the Turks pressed upon the Bosphorus. When the treaty was signed, the emperor knelt before the Pope, accepting the union. But when he returned home, he was met not with gratitude, but fury. The people of Constantinople filled the streets with cries of betrayal. "Better the Sultan's turban," they shouted, "than the Pope's tiara." It was not politics, it was pride. The Byzantines would rather die as Byzantines than live as Romans of another kind. And so they waited for the inevitable, standing like statues before the storm. By the mid-15th century, the empire was no longer an empire at all, but a single city surrounded by history. Constantinople stood alone, a golden relic adrift in an ocean of conquest. Her population had fallen from 1 million to barely 50,000. Her army numbered fewer than 10,000. The palaces of emperors had turned to museums of memory, their marble floors echoing only with footsteps of dust. Yet from the crumbling ramparts of the Theodosian walls, one could still glimpse the last miracle of Rome, its refusal to vanish. Outside those walls, the Ottomans were no longer a rising power. They were the world's new axis. From the plains of Anatolia to the gates of the Balkans, their empire stretched like a dawn, swallowing the remnants of night. And at its center stood Sultan Murad II, and later, his son, Mehmed. The boy who would become Mehmed II was not merely a conqueror in waiting, he was a mind forged in paradox. He studied Aristotle and Alexander with the same reverence he gave to the Quran. He spoke Greek as fluently as Turkish, read Latin and Persian, and dreamt of the Caesars whose ruins surrounded his realm. While his tutors taught him war, his imagination taught him empire. As a child, he would stand upon the shores of the Bosphorus, gazing across the water toward Constantinople's shimmering skyline. The domes glowed like a mirage, the cross atop Hagia Sophia catching the sun like a shard of eternity. It was said that he whispered to himself, "There, within those walls, sleeps the world, and I will wake it." When Murad died in 1451, Mehmed ascended the throne at 19. The boy had become a man, and the dream had become a plan. Constantinople, to him, was not a city, it was destiny. The Ottomans already ruled the lands that once fed it, commanded the seas that once guarded it, and surrounded it from every horizon. To take it was to complete a circle written in the language of fate. To leave it untouched was to deny history its conclusion. He began his preparations in silence. Along the narrow throat of the Bosphorus, he built a fortress, Rumeli Hisari, its towers facing the city's ancient walls across the water. The message was unmistakable. The gate of the world now had a new key holder. In Constantinople, Emperor Constantine V Palaiologos understood the truth, though few dared to speak it. He was the last in a line that had once ruled the world. His treasury was empty, his armies few, his allies distant. The West had turned away. Its kings spoke of aid, but their ships never came. The city had become an island not only in geography, but in time. A living relic the world had outgrown. Still, the emperor refused to flee. "I will not leave this city," he said, "for it is the mother of all cities. I will live within her walls, and if she falls, I will fall with her." It was an oath not of defiance, but of dignity. In the spring of 1453, Mehmed moved. His army, over 150,000 strong, marched like an ocean of steel and dust, stretching from horizon to horizon. Along with men came machines, cannons unlike any the world had seen. The largest, cast by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, was a beast of bronze, 27 feet long, capable of hurling a stone ball weighing over half a ton. It was called Basilica, and it would become the voice of the empire's end. On April 6th, the siege began. The earth shook with the roar of artillery. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Theodosian walls, those ancient ribs of stone that had defied Persians, Arabs, and Crusaders, trembled. Each blast sent shockwaves through the heart of the city, through its churches, its streets, its very memory. Inside, the people prayed. They carried icons through the boulevards, chanting hymns that had once calmed plagues and storms. The emperor rode among them, not as a monarch, but as a soldier, armor gleaming with borrowed light. The monks spoke of miracles, but the cannon spoke louder. Weeks passed. Food ran out. Hope thinned. The bells of Hagia Sophia rang for hours, their sound mingling with the thunder of Mehmed's guns. And then came the omen. The moon turned red, and a mist cloaked the city. The chronicles tell that even the sky mourned. Some whispered that the Virgin had abandoned her city. Others said she wept. By late May, the walls were crumbling. Mehmed's men had dug trenches, built towers, and filled the moat with the bodies of the fallen. On the night of May 28th, Constantine gathered his court and priests for one last liturgy inside Hagia Sophia. Candles glowed upon the golden mosaics, casting trembling halos upon faces carved with exhaustion and faith. When the service ended, the emperor turned to his companions and said, "The time has come. God has delivered the city into his will. Let each man do his duty." He rode to the walls before dawn. At sunrise, the final assault began. Wave after wave crashed against the defenses, janissaries, Anatolian infantry, mercenaries of every tongue. The Byzantines fought with the fury of those who have nothing left to lose. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and prayer. Then, as the great gate of St. Romanos splintered, the tide turned. Constantine was last seen fighting in the breach, sword in hand, his purple cloak torn away so he might die unknown among his men. No one ever found his body. Some said an angel carried him into the earth. Others said he still slept beneath the walls, waiting to return when the empire is needed again. When the battle ended, the silence was absolute. Constantinople, the city that had defied time itself, was no more. Mehmed rode through the shattered gate, his horse stepping over rubble and ruin. He gazed upon the desolation with neither joy nor triumph. History had fulfilled itself, and in that fulfillment lay tragedy. He dismounted before the Hagia Sophia. Entering its vast, echoing dome, he bent down, took a handful of dust, and let it fall through his fingers. "Be still," he whispered, "for now your glory is mine." The muezzin's call rose soon after, the first to echo where choirs had once sung. The empire of Byzantium had ended, but something vast and new had begun. When the dust of conquest settled and the banners of the crescent rose over the Bosphorus, the world turned its gaze toward a new order. The Roman Empire had ended, not with a cry, but with an echo, and that echo became the breath of another. For when Sultan Mehmed II entered Constantinople, he did not see ruins. He saw resurrection. The boy who had dreamed of Caesar now walked among his shadows. Within the marble halls of the Blachernae Palace, the spider had woven its web where emperors once signed decrees. In the vast silence of the hippodrome, weeds pushed between the stones that had felt the feet of chariots and triumphs. Yet Mehmed, still only 21, was not content to inherit decay. He had come not only to conquer a city, but to claim its soul. He declared the new capital of his empire, Constantinople, the city of Constantine, reborn beneath a new faith. He called himself Kaiser I Rum, Caesar of Rome. refusing to let the lineage of emperors perish. To the astonishment of his court, he restored the patriarchate of the Orthodox Church, appointing a new patriarch to lead the Christian flock. His was not mercy, but vision. Mehmed understood what centuries of war had failed to teach, that to truly possess an empire, one must also inherit its spirit. So the restoration began, not as a monument to Islam alone, but as a dialogue between civilizations. The great domes were repaired, the aqueducts reopened, the markets revived. Artisans from Persia, Arabia, and Greece worked side by side, their languages blending like colors in a mosaic. Within a decade, Constantinople had risen again, its skyline reborn in minarets and marble. The Hagia Sophia, that vast temple of human aspiration, was converted into a mosque. Its cross was lowered, its icons veiled, yet its dome remained, the same golden canopy that had once echoed with chants of Christendom. Under Mehmed, it became a bridge between worlds. Christian stone housing Islamic prayer, an empire of faith built atop another. He rebuilt the city as if shaping time itself. Where crusaders had burned, he planted gardens. Where emperors had ruled through blood, he ruled through imagination. The historian Critoboulos of Imbros, who had served both empires, wrote of him with awe. He was not a destroyer, but a restorer of the world. But Mehmed's vision was more than beauty. It was strategy. Constantinople was not merely a capital, it was a symbol. To control it was to inherit a millennium of legitimacy. The Ottomans, once nomads of the steppe, were now heirs of Rome. And through them, the idea of empire, of unity through power, found a new vessel. Yet history is never content with peace. For every rebirth, there is mourning. The people of Byzantium, scattered like seeds across Europe, carried with them not only their grief, but their brilliance. Scholars fled with ancient manuscripts under their arms, scrolls of Plato, Ptolemy, and Homer. They became teachers in Florence, Venice, and Padua, whispering the old wisdom into eager Latin ears. In that quiet exchange, something extraordinary happened. Byzantium, even in death, taught the world to be reborn. From those fragments of exile came the Renaissance, the light of the Greek mind, preserved through centuries of Byzantine devotion, now ignited the Western imagination. Artists painted angels with Byzantine gold, architects raised domes that echoed Hagia Sophia, philosophers spoke of human reason with the clarity once reserved for divine truth. Thus, the fall of Byzantium became the birth of modernity. From its ashes rose not darkness, but the dawn. In this way, Constantinople's story is the paradox of civilization itself. Every empire dreams of eternity, yet each must die to be remembered. Rome became Byzantium. Byzantium became Istanbul. And in that transformation, the human story found its rhythm, the endless dance of creation and decay. Mehmed II himself seemed to understand this cosmic irony. He surrounded himself not only with soldiers, but with scholars, artists, and poets. He invited Italian painters to his court, collected Greek manuscripts, and studied the stars. He saw himself not just as a conqueror of cities, but as a conqueror of ignorance. In one legend, it is said that Mehmed stood one evening upon the terrace of the palace, gazing at the ruins of the Bucolion, where the marble lions still guarded empty halls. He whispered lines from the Persian poet Ferdowsi. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watch in the towers of Afrasiab. It was both lament and prophecy, a recognition that all empires, no matter how radiant, become poems in the end. But Mehmed did not grieve. He built. He invited the Jewish refugees expelled from Spain to settle in his city, declaring, They enrich my empire while their kings impoverish theirs. He opened the gates to Armenians, Greeks, Arabs, and Persians. Under his rule, the new Istanbul became a refuge for the world's exiles, a mirror of the cosmopolitan Constantinople that had once been. In the streets, languages mingled like incense. Turkish merchants haggled beside Greek sailors, Jewish scholars debated beside Persian astronomers. The empire that rose from the ashes of Byzantium was no longer defined by race or creed, but by its gravity, the irresistible pull of its civilization. And yet, beneath this rebirth, the ghosts of Byzantium lingered. In every stone, every whisper of the wind along the Theodosian walls, one could feel the memory of what had been. The Orthodox bells still rang in secret chapels. The mosaics of saints still glimmered faintly beneath layers of plaster. The empire had changed its face, but its soul refused to be buried. Because the truth is this: cities do not die, they transform. Constantinople was not destroyed, it was transfigured. And through that transfiguration, it became eternal. The Byzantines, though conquered, lived on in the very shape of the Ottoman dream. The administration, the laws, the architecture, all bore the imprint of their predecessors. Even the crescent moon that now crowned the city's mosques had once adorned the banners of Byzantium, a relic of Artemis long before it became a symbol of Islam. It was as if history itself refused to choose between the two, fusing them into a single continuum of civilization. East and West, cross and crescent, Rome and Islam, all converged upon this one city, this singular heartbeat of the world. Centuries passed, yet the pulse of that city never ceased. Istanbul, the name it would bear, became not the grave of Byzantium, but its afterlife. From the ashes of one empire rose another that carried its rhythm forward, and in the quiet spaces between prayer and memory, the two empires spoke to each other still. The Ottomans expanded far beyond what the Byzantines had once dreamed, over the Balkans, Arabia, North Africa, and deep into Europe. But even in their triumph, they ruled from the bones of Byzantium. Their sultans walked the same marble corridors where emperors had once whispered decrees. Their calligraphers illuminated parchment where monks had written scripture. And when they raised their mosques, they followed the geometry of Hagia Sophia, the same divine symmetry that had defined the city's skyline for 1,000 years. The city became a palimpsest of civilizations, layer upon layer of glory, ruin, and rebirth. Every conqueror who walked its streets found himself conquered in turn, by its silence, by its memory, by its light. The stones of Constantinople had seen the faces of emperors and caliphs, and they kept their secrets well. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Byzantium was not in empire, nor in architecture, but in the realm of the mind. The scholars who fled its fall scattered across the Mediterranean like sparks carried by the wind. One of them, Gemistos Plethon, arrived in Italy with the teachings of Plato, igniting a fire that would reshape the philosophy of Europe. Another, Bessarion, carried entire libraries with him, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients would not perish. The world called it Renaissance, but it was, in truth, Byzantium's final sermon to humanity, a lesson on how beauty can survive even after kingdoms turn to dust. In Florence, the Medici built the Platonic Academy to honor these exiles, and there, amid the marble and sunlight, the old Greek texts were reborn in Latin tongues. The knowledge that Byzantium had preserved for 1,000 years now flowed back into the veins of the West, awakening a world that had once forgotten how to dream. And so, through ruin, Byzantium fulfilled its destiny. Its death gave birth to new art, new science, new faith in reason. The empire that had died guarding the gates of Europe ended up reopening them from within the pages of its books. Meanwhile, in the east, the Ottomans inherited not only Byzantine lands, but also its cosmic ambition. Mehmed's successors, Suleiman the Magnificent, Selim, Bayezid, would rule not merely as conquerors, but as heirs to a universal dream. They built bridges where the Byzantines had built walls, palaces where crusaders had left ashes. Istanbul became the center of the world once more, the crossroad of continents and faiths, the mirror of humanity's contradictions. But time, as always, erodes even the strongest marble. By the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire too began to wane, its palaces hollowed by decadence, its armies outpaced by the steel of the industrial West. Yet through its twilight, Istanbul remained luminous. Even as sultans signed away provinces and revolutions stirred in Europe, the call to prayer still drifted over the waters of the Golden Horn, mingling with the same gull cries that had echoed above Byzantium. Empires die, but cities remember. The 20th century arrived like a new dawn, and with it came the transformation of the Ottoman world into the Republic of Turkey. The minarets remained, the walls stood, but the soul of the city shifted once again. Istanbul, the eternal chameleon, became modern. Its streets filled with cars where chariots once thundered, its bazaars alive with voices from every corner of the earth. And yet, beneath the hum of neon and the rhythm of traffic, the old heart still beat, the heart of Constantine's city. Today, when you walk the streets of Istanbul, you can still feel Byzantium underfoot. Beneath each stone lies another, beneath each mosque a church, beneath each dream another dream. The ghosts of the Varangian Guard haunt the alleys. The faint scent of incense lingers where the divine liturgy once rose. You can trace your fingers along the Theodosian walls and feel both the courage and the sorrow of those who built them. In that way, Byzantium never truly vanished. It became a state of being, a mirror held up to the eternal human desire to build something that outlasts us. It reminds us that greatness and ruin are twins, that every civilization carries the seeds of both creation and collapse. What remains of Byzantium is not its marble, but its question. Can humanity ever build something that does not fall? Perhaps the answer lies not in permanence, but in persistence. For though the empire fell, its influence endured, reshaping faith, art, governance, and the very notion of civilization. Its hymns became music, its theology became philosophy, its architecture became aspiration. The fall of Byzantium was not the end of an age, but the turning of a page. And so, when we look at the skyline of Istanbul today, the domes, the minarets, the bridges stretched like ribbons across the Bosphorus, we are not merely seeing a city. We are seeing the echo of an idea that refused to die. We are seeing Rome, Byzantium, and the Ottomans folded into one. We are seeing the human story itself, our endless attempt to defy time by shaping it into stone. The historian Edward Gibbon once wrote that the Empire of the East expired by slow decay. But perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it did not expire at all. Perhaps it simply changed form, its marble becoming ink, its gold becoming thought, its empire becoming the world. In the end, the true empire of Byzantium was not the one of territory or armies, but of imagination. It taught mankind that knowledge could outlast conquest, that faith could outlast fire, that beauty could outlast ruin. And as the sun sets over the Bosphorus, its light catching the domes of Hagia Sophia, turning them to liquid gold, you can almost hear the whisper of that ancient city, carried by the wind across the waters. From ashes, light. From endings, eternity.